Good afternoon, everybody. That's better, that's better. Thank you very much. And it was wonderful to have a panel like this. But I must tell you, Anand, that when you said end of reason, from end of season you came to end of reason. Somebody is telling me they're going to have end of no reason sale. Okay, so whenever they want, they're going to have that sale. And as you're talking about how do you get to know the moods of consumers, whether they're angry or not, somebody said, is there a way that we can know the mood of the call center employee? Because as a consumer, if I get to know the mood of the call center employee, maybe it will be much, much better.
Actually, we can.
We can? Okay, so you should give us an app where we say, hey, what's happening at the call center? You know, is he groomy? Is he nice? Is he fun? How many of you are from fashion retail in this audience? Raise your hands. Very good. How many of you are consultants? And how many of you are property developers? Good. So I must compliment Amitabh that this is a real fashion business conference that we are having. How many of you like to have fun when you're doing your retail business? Do you all go to your store and pep up your employees and sometimes dance with them and have fun and music and swing? Yeah? If you don't do that, you're nowhere creating activity. You know, there's no experience. And when you were talking in the morning about the CEOs, I mean, the question I was wanting to ask you is how many of your CEOs really go and spend time in the store? Yeah? So how many of you spend more than 50% of your working life in the store as CEOs? 40%? 30%? 20%?
Do I include my stores? I don't know how to answer that question.
No. Well, online means in front of your screen. Yeah?
Yes.
10% of your time in your stores at least. Yeah? Not bad. At least we have people, CEOs, who spend 10% of the time. I think that's very, very important. And the other thing which Michael talked about is humanize. How do you really humanize the organization? My question to you, and I'll come to you at a later stage, Michael, is how do you humanize the CEOs of the business? Because if they don't know to look at the human being as human being, where's the question of humanizing? Anyhow, I think we are talking about fashion. We are talking about bringing alive the future of fashion and lifestyle. I just want to see how alive is our audience. Can we have some music, please? I want to see how many of you can swing on the music. Come on. Are you alive? There's only one person here. There's Manu there. Anybody else? At least you can clap. Well, there is something going live. Thank you very much. Thank you. I thought when we start this panel, we have a fantastic panel with us. The first question to the panel is, and Anant, you did mention about it, how are the Indian consumers today? What's the fashion scenario at the Indian consumer level? How fashionable are they? I'll start with you because you are learning fashion, teaching fashion, and there must be a lot of students in the audience who probably are in the business of fashion.
Yes, but you do have a bureaucrat sitting here.
Oh, so a bureaucrat also. So you also know how government is thinking of fashion. Let me tell you, when you were talking about the Bloomberg report which said you bring down the number of the per capita consumption, India is not happening that. Mr. Modi has given this a third garment. So actually we are adding on volume to the business there, yeah? So maybe you can bring that view also.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I should be talking about my experience prior to coming into fashion. And that would be with Panchayati Raj. You know, the hinterland. When we look at the youth of India, and the youth of India are beginning to be the largest single cohort in any demography anywhere. Who are they? And what is their interest? So the one thing that we can say about them is that they're very confused. They are, you know, when you are in a transition epoch, as you were mentioning earlier, there is what you know doesn't make any sense, and what you don't know, you don't know. And so you are in a position where the old and the and what you regarded as stable is no longer stable. Everything is up in the air. And when that happens, you are confused in your choices and decisions that you take. And in India, the one thing that we do when we are very confused is go for jugaad. So jugaad seems to be, in the hinterland at least, that which brings people together. It's very difficult to change sensibilities, but it's easy to change your attire. And so you can become modern in your dress while being tradition in your thought process.
I just want to stop you. Tell me one jugaad way of being fashionable. How do you do that? I know one example I'll tell you, but your jugaad way of being fashionable as an Indian.
As an Indian, well, crop my hair and wear a sari.
Well, the other example I remember is, and in a lot of places where I grew up in UP, you had one gamcha. Gamcha is a towel, 100-rupee towel, okay? When summer, you wrap it around the head and make it like a pagadi, okay? And when you want to go and take a bath, you go and dip into the river and take the gamcha and dry it off. And after that, when you want to go for work, I mean, especially if you can't afford, you tie the gamcha around your bottom and it becomes your bottom wear. So one gamcha for 100 rupees, three versions. I can tell you many more versions. But that's interesting. You're talking of jugaad. Let me go back to Dave. You are actually talking about innovation, and you have seen Indian market for the last 3 years, and you are seeing also the global market. How do you see the readiness of Indian consumer to adopt to innovation, technology, and fashion as of today?
Yeah, look, I'd sort of answer that if I can also address the jugaad. I think it's.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
I think it's India's greatest strength as well as something to watch out for. I worked in Japan and Tokyo for 6 years, and it's the opposite. The Japanese will plan meticulously for a year and execute in a day. In India, we are able to plan for half an hour and then execute and make it up as we go along. And it's not saying either one is right or wrong. I'm saying that's why entrepreneurs are coming out of India at a rapid rate. A new way of doing things is happening here that perhaps the Japanese once had and have now lost as Korea, China take them over. And they look surprised. That my team kept being surprised in Japan about how is it that Korea can do this? And they lost their edge. So I'd say it's something to be embraced, and I think it also helps the Indian consumer to adapt quickly and even reinvent and change slightly. But I think for us, I know that 3.5 years ago when I got here, we weren't treating the Indian consumer, and especially the youth, with the right respect. We would have a jugaad solution for retail. It was a bit cheaper and not our global solution. And therefore, we were surprised when we couldn't sell our more valuable product because we weren't telling the stories. We were thinking, the consumer doesn't know our Originals brand. Our Originals brand was almost zero here, while in the rest of the world it was 30 and 40%. And people told me everything. You can't sell white shoes to Indians because, it's too dirty, it's too dusty. This is my own team telling me this. But really all it was, we hadn't told the stories. And I know the heritage of a sports brand that I just showed up there in Europe or in more developed markets is well understood. And here it's come quite late. So we have to retell the stories, and a superstar shoe or a Stan Smith shoe was known 30 years ago somewhere else, may not have been known yet. So we have to reimagine and retell those stories. And when we've done that, I think we've been quite successful.
There's one more way of doing it. Maybe there's a lot of Indians who are rich, but who are like my age, 50 years plus, 40 years plus. You also need to influence the daughters. I went to your store, and my daughter was there with me. No questions asked. She just said, you buy this, Originals. And I blew a lot of money on that.
Glad to hear that. Very glad to hear all of that stuff.
Yeah. So, Suresh, from apparel fashion, you've also gone into Sephora, and you've gone into a lot of accessories, beauty, cosmetics. Tell me, how is that adoption? Because in 1991, when we started Shoppers, we literally had to beg women to come and actually try a lipstick. That time we had only 2, I think, brands. We had Lakmé and one more brand. How is your experience, and how is the Indian consumer changing as far as beauty is concerned?
See, Nagesh, I think I'll answer your first question. I think, what I realized, coming from a non-fashion industry, when I came into this industry, what I realized is, I think, fashion industry, to some extent, it's very inward-looking. It doesn't look at the consumer. I think that is one learning which, in a way, I brought in to look at, more from the consumer point of view, because it's all about autumn, winter, and spring, summer, and the design I create. Whereas there are many consumers who do not even know what is autumn, winter, and what is spring, summer. There are many consumers who do not know about what is 1-ply or 2-ply or count. I think the most important thing, which is what I think the technology will actually do to the fashion industry, is to really look from the consumer point of view, rather than looking from internally and then say that, okay, this is the design and this is So that I think is the most important thing. I think once you look any business from the consumer point of view, then you can actually adopt from whether it's you're selling apparel or whether you're selling beauty. I don't think, that is going to be very difficult. In my view, I think fashion industry should really start looking more from the consumer point of view and then say that, what is right there, rather than doing things more from the internal. Because quite often, I always used to say when I came in, for example, manufacturing used to be such a big issue in the sense, there never used to be a concept of, on-time delivery in this business. Everything used to get delayed and it is taken for granted. I always used to say, what is so complicated about this business? It has got 3 parts. There's a cloth, there is a button, and there's a thread. But beyond that,
And there's a zip also. Yeah, don't forget. That's a very important accessory. Yeah.
So I think, if you look at, more from the consumer point of view and not look at technically and then say that what is right for the consumer, I think we can definitely adopt, any business. And I think that's what we have done with Sephora as well. I think from the checkered history it had for 2 years or 3 years, I think we have now brought it to real limelight, what that brand deserves.
Wonderful. Let me go to Anand, because everything you have done in the last 5 years is all outside in, including getting all the outsiders from your industry into your company. You have taken a lot of guys from the brick and mortar who are all working there. But for us, we are one industry, so it doesn't make a difference. Your house, our house is all the same.
Thank you.
So tell me 3 parts of outside in. How do you get to learn from the customers? Second is, how have you built the whole outside in? And secondly, what kind of a mindset should a CEO have, whether it is online, offline, omni-channel, to build a real outside-in culture within the organization?
Yeah. No, so, firstly, thanks for including me in the fraternity. I think the one good part about the fraternity is everybody seems to enjoy alcohol. So I think it's one common denominator.
For those of you who don't know, this guy's hobby is actually wine. Huh? So if anybody wants to know what are the different kinds of wine, where are they grown, what are the grapes, and you want to taste wine, his charges are in dollars term, but he is a guy who loves wine. So
Thank you. It's my core area of expertise. More serious note, I think if I think about consumers and just understanding consumers, what I think digital has changed is you're able to understand consumers one-on-one and through the entire customer journey, right? So if I take a typical offline retailer, that experience, till today at least, is not hugely digitally enabled. So you don't know exactly what the funnel looks like, right? At every step of the way. Now that's changing. Whereas I think on the online side, it's just a much, from the time they click on some advertisement to the time they actually make the transaction, how do they spend the time? What do they really do? I think it's just a very deep understanding of how do consumers make decisions. Now that in itself is not interesting, but if you combine that with the fact that, for example, in Myntra, 40% of the people log in through their Facebook accounts, and you now know a lot about them as people, then your understanding of the consumer, both in terms of who they are as people and what they do as consumers, bringing that together, I think creates incredible opportunities, right? And incredible opportunities to create new brands, to satisfy them in very different ways. I'll give you an example. One thing for us is we created a service called Try and Buy. The fact is, online, there's no trial room. The fact also is that the biggest reason for offline to online adoption, or the rate of that adoption, is they don't know how the touch and feel is, how the size and fit is. So we started a service where people could order 3 different sizes, right? And you could actually get that person to come there, wait for you. It's a virtual trial room, and you send back what you don't like. That increases adoption enormously. So from a consumer standpoint, getting their online, offline, and digital behavior all together and understanding it, I think is very important. I think outside in, I just want to echo a little bit of what Suresh said, right? I also didn't understand why there was autumn, winter in a country like India and spring, summer. So one of the things that we have done is we've created really intelligent fast fashion, which says, here's the trend. We know that trend digitally. You're able to manufacture it really quickly. And then why can't you actually satisfy it that way, right? So intelligent fast fashion through this Vorta and Rapid is something that I think is very outside in, because I don't understand why it should take a year or 2 years or even 6 months to make a garment, right? Finally, from an outside in, and how do you keep the culture actually different? It is actually to get people from outside the industry. And I think to learn from each other. So I would say if I take the management team of Myntra, 50% have some form of fashion experience, but the other 50% just don't. They're much more technology, consulting, and others. And I think that mix has really helped. And I think learning from one another and being open to learn from one another, I think is actually one of those that I would really encourage, and this looking for learnability.
Ravi, sitting in America, Mr. Trump's territory, how do you react to what these gentlemen and lady are saying in terms of the Indian consumer, and how is it different from the way you see, of course, youngsters in Yale and otherwise the whole American population?
Sure, thank you.
Do you consider Mr. Trump fashionable?
Not quite, yeah.
Okay.
It's nice
That-
to be back
I
in
like the
Mumbai.
tone of it, not quite.
It was just a pure coincidence. I happened to be here today, and glad to be here. I was here with Nagesh 6 or 7 years ago. We had a lot of fun. Let me tell you a couple of interesting things which I think feed into the online-offline issue that I've observed in the US, and I think it's going to be a challenge even in India. One thing with fashion in general, in apparel retailing, there's a lot of impulse purchase that goes on in the stores. If you look at the whole business, like how much of it is unplanned because you went with your friend or you decided you wanted to buy one thing, you ended up buying a few other things. Online stores really haven't figured out how to do impulse very well right now. In fact, this is true not just of apparel, it's true also of basic food products. I was talking to a big company like Mars, which makes Wrigley chewing gum. 70% of Wrigley chewing gum is sold in front of the aisle, checkout counter. They have in the aisle, but 70% of it is sold in front of the checkout counter. There's no checkout counter when you go online. So if the business moves online, so when you talk about omni-channel, one of the things I tell the companies is, yes, you're adding to channels, but your total sales actually might come down if you don't figure out how to do impulse online. And there are variations on how do you do impulse online. There are flash sales, there's runway, and India has to, Indian retailers will have to figure out what does impulse mean in the Indian context. But it's non-trivial because if you look at behavior online, it's much more planned. It's much more, I want to go in to buy something, to do something. Whereas in a store, you're wandering around, and before you know, you buy a whole bunch of things. So if you don't figure out how to do impulse online, I think as you increase the number of channels, as you go online, it might actually reduce your total sales. The second observation, which I've actually made with all types of retailers, not just apparel, but even if it's retail pharmacies, retail groceries, I said if I go into your stores, whether it's a Macy's or if it's a Bloomingdale's or a Saks, it doesn't matter, or if you go to CVS or a Walmart, they look different. The organization is different, the shelves look different. They don't have to be good or bad, they just look different from each other. I said when I go into your online stores, they look identical. There's no customer experience online, which is very specific, and I look at even the high, sort of the better stores here, Net-a-Porter, Farfetch, and they're all struggling with the customer experience piece. So the piece that you mentioned, I think, what people are doing before, what people are doing after, what people are doing instead, I think that, yes, online helps a lot to figure out. But customer experience online, again, I think people haven't figured out really how to make it interesting. And so the other interesting point here I want to add, and I'd like to get sort of feedback from what you guys think, personalization. So if you look at fashion, it's kind of a complicated business. If you look at Rolex watches as an example, they made pretty much 3 or 4 watches, and they made it for the last 30, 40 years. They don't make a whole lot of 600 flavors of that. And maybe this holds more for high luxury items and less than mass fashion. But I think there's something in fashion where you don't want to be too personalized. So this whole notion of personalization, I think, hits a wall because I do want my stuff to be recognized also. And the more you make differently, I think the harder it is to get recognition. So this whole notion of like what the role, and personalization will play a role, don't get me wrong, but the question is what kind of role. It's not that I know what color, what design. So take Adidas or Nike does this in the US, like, you can personalize your shoes. Most people don't necessarily want to spend time personalizing their shoes. They're confused. They don't know what to do. There's a small niche who wants to do that. So how do you use these techniques? I think it's going to be very exciting, but it's not going to evolve necessarily the way it evolves in a lot of different products.
Impulse personalization experience, Dave was staring at you and Anant was giving a smile. So I need to know as to what's happened. He just introduced 4D. the future part of it. Yeah, Anant, you want to say something?
So I think on the impulse one, the answer is simple. Do you have Myntra on your phone?
Sorry,
No.
me?
Do you have Myntra on your phone?
I don't, yeah.
Okay. So I can solve the impulse thing for you if you just download Myntra right now. No, on a more serious
Anant,
note.
Anant,
Sorry,
any
just,
download happening in this conference, 10% of all he buys goes to images.
okay, fabulous.
Okay.
Done. I think it's a good deal. But I think it's a great point that you make on impulse. I actually do think vertical fashion destinations are starting to figure out impulse much more. Horizontals don't. Because fashion by definition is a browse experience. You come, you want serendipity, you want to look at many things, like in a store, and then figure out what you want. I think the big thing that's happening is content. So a lot of content and commerce are mixing together. So the average customer to Myntra comes 12 times a month to Myntra. They obviously don't shop all 12 times, right? So they come for window shopping, they look for content, they look for inspiration. I don't think it's a solved problem, but I do think a lot of us are making a lot of effort to create the same impulse. And I would argue that because, and maybe it's different in the US, because so much of our commerce is mobile phone led, actually the chances of impulse are much higher. You're in a car, you're stuck in traffic, there's an icon on your phone, and you keep flipping. And the chances of actually buying it are dramatically greater than actually getting to a mall and a store. So that may be slightly different in an Indian context. But I fully agree with your point that I think impulse needs to be cracked.
But in India, Anand, the ecosystem also helps us. Traffic jam helps us. All those things actually help us to consume more content.
Absolutely. I think this is the
Dave, what do you think about the personalization part of it?
Yeah, look, I definitely understand what you're saying. I think from a mainstream mass, you're right. There is a lot of people who want to say they want to stand out, but actually they're secretly a little bit afraid to stand out. I think as you go to the spearhead, you go to the tip, you get a lot of fashionistas, a lot of people who do want to stand out and who, I just came back from Berlin where you can see it on a high street. You can see the trendiest store to the mass store, and the mass stores all look a bit the same, and they're struggling. And the trendy stores have a unique point of view and are starting to attract a lot of people. So that's, again, I think here, when we introduce some very limited editions in limited quantities, it's not exactly personalization, obviously, but it's limited and it's unique. People want that. People put a high value on that and are willing to part with money from their wallets. I think the other reason that people don't really want to invest their time into sort of that unique experience is because the experience is either not that good or it takes too long. If we can make the experience better and shorter and value added, and that's why, hey, I get a pair of my own running shoes in 30 minutes, made for me on the spot, that actually takes into account the way I run, helps me perform better, lowers my chance of injury, I think people will be more interested. And I think that's why it's still work in progress.
You want to say something? I saw your mic going up and down. So.
Yes. One was the fact I'd like to go back to...
Can you keep the mic a little closer to your...
Yeah, to the way we do our fashion shows and the timings of this. When NIFT started, and we were at a time when there really wasn't a fashion business in India, and you were looking at the export market, and that's why the spring, summer, autumn, winter context arises. We recently had an international conference in which David Abraham was talking precisely about this, and he was mentioning that in India we need to develop an Indian idiom. It's time that we looked at our emerging huge market out there. So why don't we look at festivals when people are footloose and wallet-free and are going out and making those purchases? So why don't we target Deepavali, target Holi, target Pongal, target Onam, the times when people actually want to be going out and looking at the festive season, the wedding season. So that was one thing which we wanted to talk about. And another thing was also in this context, and I'd like to do a flip on personalization. Look at the Indian woman, and the India in terms of transition of the costume of women has been going from draped to fitted garments. Now, when you move into fitted garments, then you need size. Yep. And where are the sizing solutions in the country? With e-commerce too, you have this huge issue of returns. And we are also now, finally, the country, the government is come forward to say that we're going to do a sizing survey which is going to be the biggest any country has done ever, and look at Indian size, which could be standardized across markets. And it's going to be very interesting as to what that's going to throw by way of opportunities and how it's going to impact on the way design works in the future.
Yeah, but you can't do an Indian size. That I don't think will be fair. You'll have to do a Malayali size and a Punjabi size and a Sardar size, and okay, you'll have to do that kind of sizing. You can't run through one size. But let me check what the audience is like. How many of you shop only online? Raise your right hand. Only online. Just 2 of them. How many of you shop only offline? Wow. So just 4 of them who shop only online. And how many of you shop online and offline? Raise both your hands. Yeah, keep it like that for 2 minutes. Before lunch, it's nice to have all of you awake.